What's up everybody, my name is Kincaid, and if you're new to the channel, I've been working on the ultimate YZ300 build for the last few months. In today's video, I'm building this beautiful engine from start to finish. If you would like a chance to win this bike when it's done, I believe at the time of posting this, there are 375 entries remaining. You can tap or click the link on screen or in the description to get yourself entered. Now let's build a sexy engine. This may upset a few of you, but my time using the bread method is coming to an end. What's the bread method? Check out this video when you're finished watching this one. This is the first bearing to ever defeat me with the bread method. I couldn't get it. So I caved and I finally bought the tusk bearing remover, which means I now have the actual tool that eliminates the need for the bread method. The bread method has served me well for 3 years now. Big thanks to that random guy at Napa Auto Parts who told me about it.
Now let's yank this bearing out.
With the removal of that final bearing, my case halves and inner clutch cover were fully stripped down and ready to be masked off, sandblasted, and Cerakoted. Being new to Cerakoting and having never masked anything like this in my life, I made sure to take my time and do a thorough job. I used some heat tape and silicone plugs that I bought on Amazon to make sure that I covered all of the open surfaces on each part. While this was definitely time consuming, it was also very satisfying and I knew it would be worth it for the end result. A set of X-Acto knives that I bought on Amazon as well came in very handy as I was able to make it into those tight spaces and cut through that heat tape with no problem to ensure a perfect masking job. I think I've finally worked out all the kinks with my Harbor Freight blast cabinet. I have the dust collection system working well, and I finally managed to stop all the leaks after resealing the cabinet 3 times. Once these engine components were blasted, I put them in the oven for another hour at 300 degrees to gas them out as Cerakote recommends. And then I mixed my Cerakote Midnight and got to spraying. This now being my 3rd time Cerakoting, I am starting to work out all the kinks and I'm definitely getting better at it. I am figuring out all of the settings for the spray gun, making sure I use the proper pressure, making sure I'm mixing properly. Once I had good coverage on all of these engine components, I baked them in the oven again at 300 degrees to cure the Cerakote. And once I pulled them out and removed the masking, I was very happy with the result. I hit each component with compressed air to make sure I got any blast media that has found its way into the cases out, and then I pulled my Pro X crankcase bearings out of the freezer and installed them into the case halves. After installing those crank bearings and crank seals, I moved on to transmission bearings. I took special care this time when installing all of the retainers for the transmission bearings because with my RM125 build, one of my retainer screws came loose and caused a transmission failure that ultimately forced me to rebuild the engine with only 4 hours on the bike. That was a devastating, time-consuming, and costly mistake that I just have to use as a learning experience moving forward to become a better engine builder. With all new bearings and retainers installed, it was time to install the crankshaft, which is always an exciting moment. I love bolting the bottom end together. I used my Tusk crank puller to install that crank with no issues, and then I installed the transmission. I think Yamaha transmissions are more difficult to install than other makes because the shift forks have the rods on them versus just sliding through after the fact. So it's a little tricky to line everything up, but I did manage to get it all together. With that tranny installed, it was time to whip out the MotoSeal gasket maker and apply that to a case half to get the cases all bolted together. The cases went together without much trouble and just a few love taps from a mallet, and then I bolted the halves together using some brand new hardware from Fastmetric, and wow, do those shiny new bolts look so nice on those Cerakoted case halves. I mounted the bottom end into my engine stand, which is always a satisfying step forward. I started to prep the inner clutch cover and the water pump shaft was pretty gouged out, which is a very common problem with these YZs, so I ordered a new one of those and replaced that. After installing the water pump, I was going to install the shift assembly and continue progress on the bottom end, but I discovered that the stopper lever had a crack in it, which made it unusable, and I was going to need to order a new one of those to continue progress. I switched gears by tackling the outer clutch cover, which I had already sandblasted and had a cool idea for the color scheme. I masked around the indented Yamaha lettering on that cover and hit it with some primer followed by black paint. I moved forward by hitting the cover with Prime MX cleaning wheels. I started with the coarse wheel to get big scratches and pitting out, and then moved on to the fine cleaning wheel to get that nice, beautiful polished finish. I tried to be consistent with the way I ran the cover across the wheels to get that nice brushed aluminum look. Finally, I hit the cover in a consistent direction with a Scotch-Brite pad to really finish off that brushed aluminum look, and I think the cover turned out great. Some of the scratches and pitting still show a little bit, but I really didn't want to go any more than that because I didn't want to remove any more material than was absolutely necessary. The clutch cover turned out so good that I made the water pump and power valve covers match. Next up was getting this old, notched, worn out clutch basket replaced with a freshie from Pro X. I ground off the rivets in order to remove the gear, which I had done for the first time on last year's RM125 build, so I had a decent idea what I was doing. New to me with this clutch basket was removing the Kickstarter gear, which I had never had to do before, and the instructions say to do with an 8-ton press. I thought that maybe I could get it done using heat and sockets in my vise, but I pretty immediately broke the clutch basket just about in half, which I thought was pretty impressive. I texted Mike at Deja Moto to see if he had any great ideas on how to solve this without the proper tools, and I headed over to his shop. He ended up notching the basket using an angle grinder, and then he hit it with a hammer and a chisel to crack all the way through the basket, making that basket plenty weak to be able to remove the gear. At this point, I figured I could finish it off myself, so I brought it back home and tried the same method I used previously, thinking that the basket was going to be super weak and it would pop right out. But as it turns out, I just broke the clutch basket even more and realized that that thing was still in there pretty solid. After quite a bit more time and effort, I ended up chiseling away at the remains of the clutch basket and finally got that gear out. I set that aside for now as I need to find a machine shop to press that in for me. My cylinder came back from Millennium Technologies, big board to 72 millimeters, making this a 300cc displacement. They also modified that power valve to work with the big bore, and this is going to be one beast of an engine. I contemplated for a while whether or not I was going to Cerakote the cylinder, largely because of how much work it involves, but ultimately I have a vision for this engine that I have to follow through with, so I started the process. I believe this is my last batch of parts for this build that will be Cerakoted in the Midnight colorway, so I prepped all of those parts at the same time as well to coat them all in one batch. I was definitely a little bit nervous about sandblasting this cylinder. There was something about taking this cylinder that was freshly replated, vapor blasted, and ready to go and shoving it in a sandblast cabinet that felt a little bit wrong, but ultimately I knew it would be worth it. I blasted each of the parts to be Cerakoted, and on that cylinder, a couple portions of tape definitely popped up during sandblasting due to that airflow. I wasn't concerned about any sand having damaged anything internally, but I was concerned about any sand that got in there and would cause damage if I didn't get it all out. Ultimately, I decided the best path forward was to fully remove the masking, and then I washed the cylinder thoroughly with soap and water. I shined a flashlight throughout the cylinder to make sure that every grain of sand was removed, and then I masked the cylinder once again, and everything was ready for coating. Previously, I would stand on my hydraulic scissor lift stand from Redline to hang the drop cloth from my ceiling while Cerakoting, but since the bike is actually on that stand now, I was forced to buy a stepladder, which is something I really should have bought a very long time ago. I mixed the Cerakote once again, as the instructions suggest, and then got to coating the parts. By the way, I did already post the video of building the wheels for this bike. I did that one as a how-to, detailing everything about lacing and truing wheels that I know, so if you're looking to build your own wheels, feel free to check that video out. Once this final batch of parts had full coverage, I baked them in the oven. I was pretty impressed with my Tetris skills to manage to get everything in there, throwing the cylinder in the back and moving the rest of the parts to the very front on a rack. After getting my clutch basket back from the machine shop with that kickstart gear pressed in, the bottom end was ready for assembly. I soaked the new clutch plates in oil, laid everything out on the bench, and got to work.
Just got the bottom end all bolted up. First thoughts, gorgeous. And then I started spinning this crank over, and this engine sounds kind of loud. The rod has no up and down play, the bearing moves smoothly, there's nothing that feels like it's sticking when it's making that noise, but obviously it's making a noise. We'll get it sorted out, but got a little bit of uncertainty right now. After another hour or so of diagnosis, I am here to report my findings. I'm feeling a little bit better about things. So, clutch on. We still have the noise. Clutch off. Our noise disappears. The sound is not coming from the crankshaft, which is good news and confirms that I didn't damage those crank bearings when installing them. The sound is coming from the transmission, and I believe it's simply because it's dry. I did put some assembly lube on the gears, but probably could have been a little more liberal with it. That said, while I was doing all this diagnosis, I did go ahead and measure the crank runout, and despite being very close to true, it is not perfectly true. This is a big hindsight 2020 moment. I had inspected this crank to the best of my ability before installing it and figured it was good to use. Still, I think if I were to run it, I wouldn't have any issues. But for the caliber of this build and what I'm trying to do, and the fact that this is going to one of you when the bike is finished, I've decided I am going to replace the crankshaft with a brand new one from YZ300. So, little hiccup in the project, but just gonna stay positive and enjoy the process because this thing is gonna be a beast when it's done. So I'm gonna throw on some tunes and resplit these cases. Let's do it. That didn't take too long. It's only 10 o'clock in the morning. I was definitely pretty worked up yesterday. You never want to have to take steps back in a project, but a couple deep breaths, it'll all be good. So turning the transmission, listen to this. That is the sound I was hearing, just exaggerated once it was spinning fast with me turning it over with all of the other gears installed. And inspecting the whole transmission and the way it's installed, everything still looks good. I'm not even going to remove it. I think it is purely a lack of lubrication allowing those gears to make the noise. All right, guys, it's been a few days and my brand new crankshaft assembly from YZ300 is sitting behind me on the bench. This assembly even comes with new gaskets and seals as well as new main bearings, but the part we're after is this beautiful new crankshaft. I watched YZ300's video on their development process for these cranks and it really is incredible what they've done. I also really appreciate this comment that they have pinned on that YouTube video. I guess there were some reported issues with YZ300 cranks in years past. They took those issues very seriously, put the effort into R&D to improve their product. And the crankshaft sitting on my bench right now is a refined product that should be rock solid in this motor. If you want to check out that video, I'll link it in the description. It's actually really interesting. They randomly disassemble cranks to inspect tolerances. They do dyno testing for 4 hours at wide open throttle on these things. Can you imagine this thing going at 12,000 RPM for 4 hours? Pretty impressive stuff. So big thanks to YZ300 for supporting this build. I've used a handful of YZ300 cranks and builds over the years and they've all performed great. I know you've already seen this bottom end come together once, so let's turn this thing into an engine. I lied, not quite there yet. I just had a very interesting discovery that I missed the first time around. The only part of this I wasn't able to do myself was pressing that gear in. I took this to a machine shop in town and to the naked eye it looks good, but check this out. When I turn this over, you can see the clutch itself has a wobble. So I'm gonna go back over to the machine shop and have them press this again and make sure that it's perfectly straight this time. Well guys, the saga of the YZ300 engine build continues. Unfortunately, the machine shop used too much force on this basket. That gear is sideways and it's not going straight. They did everything in their power to fix it and were unable to, and damaged the inside of the clutch basket. So I ordered one from YZ300 that comes with the kickstart gear installed. It's a shame I can't run this Pro X basket. It's still an upgrade from OEM and it's a little cheaper. So that said, if you're looking for a clutch basket and you have the means to press a gear in, Pro X is a great affordable option. But if you don't want to deal with pressing a kickstart gear, you have options like YZ300 that come with the gear installed. All this said, today's progress does not have to stop here. I can still get this top end installed.
I went ahead and reinstalled the power valve assembly. Millennium Technologies had already cleaned up all the components for me, making that reinstallation a breeze. I verified proper opening and closing of the power valve assembly, and it is so cool to see how these work. And then I proceeded by installing that oversized piston for this big bore YZ300. After installing that base gasket, I took my freshly Cerakoted cylinder, installed it, and torqued down the bolts, and then verified that the piston moved up and down in the cylinder smoothly. I reinstalled that power valve cover that I'd polished with prime wheels, and then used the double nut method to install the cylinder studs.
It is Saturday afternoon, just in the middle of doing some sled work, but when a package from Phathead Racing arrives, you drop everything. Oh my gosh, what an absolute beauty.
If you are not familiar with Phathead Racing, you should be, and I will tell you a little bit more about the company while I polish up these components and rebuild this Kickstarter. Phathead Racing is run by Luke, who's a super friendly, super helpful guy who's passionate about what he does. He offers aftermarket heads for 2 strokes. The thing that makes Phathead so unique is not only the fact that these heads are gorgeous and he offers custom laser etching, but the domes for these heads are also interchangeable, allowing you to adjust the compression of your bike and run different fuels. And as this build exhibits, Phathead offers cylinder heads for big bores as well. So if you are looking to upgrade your two-stroke engine, check out Phathead Racing, and also check out this gorgeous before and after using Prime MX wheels on all these components. Note that links to all of the amazing companies who helped make this engine build happen will be down in the description below. My new Wiseco clutch basket finally arrived, so I installed the gear and then peened the bolts as the instructions say, and when I installed the clutch, I was pleased to find that it aligned perfectly. I also decided to order a new clutch hub because the old one was a little beat up and I want this engine to be perfect. The bottom end was finally back to where I had it a couple weeks ago, so I connected that governor rod to the top end and installed that power valve cover along with the Kickstarter, followed by some V-Force 3 reeds. Now I shifted my attention to the left side of the engine, and as you can see, the whole flywheel side is still exposed. That's because I'm waiting on an electric start kit from Panthera, and I will install that once the engine is in the frame, but I installed a new countershaft sprocket from Pro X along with that case saver and the shift lever. Finally, I threaded the spark plug into that beautiful Phathead Racing cylinder head, and the engine is ready to go in the frame. Guys, I can't tell you how good it feels to have this engine all bolted together. Such an exciting feeling. Again, one of you will be taking this gorgeous engine home inside of a beautiful YZ300. Tap the link on screen or in the description to get yourself entered to win. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to follow along with this build. With the engine in the frame, progress is going to continue very quickly from here, and I can't wait for the first start in a couple weeks. Leave me a like rating if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys soon with some more content.